The junior final at 11:45 a.m. Westmeath take on Wexford in the intermediate final at 1:45 p.m. and the defending champions Dublin are up against Meath in the senior final at 4:15 p.m. Tickets are priced at €25 for adults and €5 for under 18s. Tickets are available now from am.ticketmaster.com/GAA. Big Lynn, in Borca Croking.
Off the ball. This is News Talk.
Yeah, you're welcome back. So we're turning to the GAA. Kerry 22 points, Tyrone 3-14. The ambush came to pass. We'll be joined by Colm Cavanagh in just a moment. Billy Joe Padden is with us now. Hey, Billy Joe.
How are things, Joe?
Ooh, that was interesting. So Tyrone surprised everyone a little bit. Although I found as the week went on, people were talking up the possibility of an ambush. And boy, I mean, from early on, it became apparent that Tyrone, after all the COVID and after the layoff and everything else, Tyrone were ready to go.
They sure were. They started really aggressively. I think, Frank Burns, I was watching it from the hill, and he laid a hit down there in front of the Hogan stand right from the off. And he was a late change to the game, and you could just see that was their mentality right from the word go. And I think when you play a team like Kerry, who are so undercooked really in terms of having a difficult or a tough game where they're really tested, that's the approach to take. Hit them early, hit them off, and try and play at a high tempo. And that's exactly what Tyrone did. And I suppose the remarkable thing for them was that they were able to keep it up for over 100 minutes of football.
Yeah, you kept waiting for them to wilt in their energy levels, and it never happened. Happy to say Colm Cavanagh is with us as well. Hey, Colm.
Hi Joe, how are you?
Yeah, very well. So come here, is there like a Pat Spillane picture over the dartboard in the Cavanagh household this week, or how's all that going?
Yeah, look, I'm not sure. The two guys had a right go at each other, in fairness, rightly or wrongly. Look, that sort of thing goes on, and I suppose from talking to Sean that he sort of wanted to, probably support the Tyrone piece, just on that. And look, we're in crazy times at the moment, and I suppose Pat has his, he's entitled for his opinion to make assumptions and whatnot. But look, that's we'll put that to the side. It was a great game of football, and
oh, look at you weasel back out of that.
I suppose it's one of those things that just goes on in it, and look, no, I just. Move on to football.
Is that right? I got the impression Sean was coming out, gloves on, and he was almost the first line of Tyrone defence. This was going to be a Tyrone assault on all fronts today.
Yeah, look, it's hard to know. I don't know what he was thinking, but at the same time, I can see where he was coming from. That look, I have a guy that works for us, Ben McDonald actually works for me, and look, I know Tyrone have been very, very cautious over the lockdown periods and had stuck by the guidelines as tightly as anyone. They never met for long periods this year, and I suppose I would have passed that on to the guys. So we feel in Tyrone a wee bit that look, the guys have done their best to try and avoid this. The cases are completely crazy up here at the moment. So look, how they picked it up, whether it's people suggesting it was socialising, people, who knows? But what's done is done, and I just wouldn't like that to overshadow the football that was played and all that.
Well, I don't think it will ultimately. Had you a sense, Colm, because even Brian Dewar and Fergal Logan afterwards said they weren't sure. Had you a sense of how Tyrone were going to pitch up energy levels wise in advance of this game? Had you got word from the camp as to how they were feeling?
Not really. I suppose we all, I suppose, knew that there was a certain amount of guys that had tested positive. I know a couple in particular were fairly heavily affected by it, in terms of they had proper symptoms and were really struggling. And I've had COVID myself, and I know how it can affect you, because going back into training of any sorts, and I remember going back to the gym myself after having it, and I felt really, really bad. So they would have no real way of knowing. They wouldn't have had an awful lot of time to actually work that out. They would have been relying on the players themselves to sort of own up and go, look, I'm not feeling it, or I am, and that's a very hard thing for any player to at this stage of the year, such an important day, to step up and go, look, I'm not feeling great, or whatever. So it probably, I was very, very interested to see the starting lineup, in terms of it hadn't changed massively, because I was expecting a few guys that might have been starters, mainstays who potentially could have had it and may not have been playing. But look, thankfully, their energy levels seem to be at the pitch of it okay, and they seem to have come through it.
Because Billy Joe, if they were very concerned about energy levels, it would have been entirely expected that they might say, right, drop back, men behind the ball will sit deep. Whereas instead, with great energy required, they really tried to meet Kerry further up the pitch.
They did. I think that's as much, though, to them, just the Tyrone players on the field at the time recognising, look here, there were times early stage in the first half where I felt Tyrone were actively trying to slow the pace of the game down. You had McGeary holding onto the ball very comfortably, really good in possession, Burns there as well. And then when they found that so easy, I think they just grew in confidence and then were able to keep possession quite comfortably. And then I felt that they even themselves, there would have been an unknown about how you'd react coming back from that, even just what you'd miss in training if their collective training sessions were disrupted, and I'm sure they were, with the COVID protocols. That there'd be a bit of unknown territory there as a player, and I just felt they just grew in confidence as the game went on. Each time they weren't getting pressurised. I think it was one aspect of the game that Kerry would be really disappointed with was how their forwards really didn't create any turnovers in the Tyrone defence, and Tyrone defenders were very, very comfortable coming out with the ball even the early stages. And when you think the Tyrone full back line got 3 points from play in the first half, well, that tells it that story.
Yeah, all-round performance from that defence, wasn't it, Colm? As Billy Joe says, when the opportunity arose, they got up the pitch, they kicked their points, either, counter-attacking points, or on other occasions, very patient Tyrone play. They could do it both ways in attack. And then in defence, I made this point yesterday to Darragh Conaja and Enda McGinley. Like, in some ways, one of the defining aspects of the game, Colm, was the number of turnovers that Tyrone forced. And early on, they got a good feel, I felt, for David McGoldrick's threshold of what was a foul and what wasn't. Like, they really, and this is a compliment, Tyrone might think, oh geez, here you go again. It's not that. This is a compliment, because too many times we watch really good sides and no one lays a hand on them. Whereas every time Kerry player was in possession, like, they were really impeded, they were really stopped. And I'd say a couple of times it was borderline a foul, and then Tyrone player got out just in time. Like, there's an art to that, there's a discipline to that. They read the referee beautifully, and they made Kerry lives miserable. I thought that was it really jumped out to me as a big aspect of this game right the way through.
Yeah, look, they knew they were going to have to come out very aggressive, and I suppose you're probably right in the sense that you have to sometimes read a referee. There's some of the top level referees that, like, another day that game there would have been so many fouls given, because both teams, I felt, were playing on the edge, especially probably Tyrone there. As you said, they nearly had an art of the half foul, but getting out before there was a free blown. And fair play to David Colerick in a way, because he let the game flow. He let it. He seemed to make calls only when he needed to, which was I think it added to the actual game to watch that. But in terms of the defence for Tyrone, like, they knew they had to be. They were going to have to come out and be very, very, very aggressive in this. They seem to get their matchups right from that regard. And look, you could see by some of the turnovers and the block that Petty Hart made and other plays that it just meant so much to them. They were throwing themselves at the ball, and whenever they did make a turnover, they were you could see they maybe let it roar, and you could just see that they were buzzing for that, and they had to be at that level. If they didn't come, and I've played in Tyrone teams over the years where we haven't brought that level. You've been maybe comforted back into a system or a style of play where it's all about shuffling together and being real methodical in what you're doing. And something for me with that Tyrone team at the weekend, and I said it a few weeks ago, was that they're just playing with an awful lot of freedom and an awful lot of passion, and that's something I do believe that we have lacked in the years gone by, and probably a reason why we haven't been able to get over. We've done okay and won titles and whatnot, but we've never really pushed on and beaten the Kerry, Mayos and Dublins of this world. And that the guys knew that they were going to have to pitch at that level. Now, in terms of the full back line scoring a few points, like, all them lads are very, very comfortable coming up the pitch. And Mickey Hart, to be fair, was something that he would have put into the guys that, look, these are all footballers. These aren't pigeonholed in your cornerback position. So, like, Patrick Hampsey scoring a point, Ronan McMee coming up and kicking a point, McKiernan and whatnot. Look, that's nothing new to the lads, and it's probably, to be fair, something that Kerry will look back on and probably be a wee bit annoyed about, because Kerry, I felt, were very good man-on-man. Like Tom O'Sullivan done a great job, and Darren McCurry. Jason Foley had a good game. He just sort of probably was struggling near the end, but Kerry actually man-on-man were very, very good defensively. It was the sort of collective piece I felt that really lacked. It was nearly like they hadn't worked on a system and play and seeing danger and getting back in and covering, because the late runners from Tyrone at times, like the likes of Hampsey's Point and McNamee's in particular, there's little to no pressure on them, so they'll be disappointed with that in that regard. But yeah, look, Tyrone had to come with intensity and really put in a massive shift in terms of energy levels, and fair play that they've done that.
Couple of interesting points there, Billy Joe. We'll come to stopping the Tyrone runners in a second from a Kerry point of view, but just on the Tyrone defence. So they've laid out their stall, as Colm's talked about there. Huge pressure on the ball carrier. They're not just shuffling across in a system, they're going at the Kerry players and they're trying to take that ball off them. Billy Joe, what did Kerry do? Like, what was their plan in attack, and what should they have done? Because look, I know they ran into a lot of blind alleyways, but like, it looked difficult out there as well. What did Kerry not change or not do or not mix up in attack?
Well, Kerry were totally focused on getting the ball to David Clifford, and that was the right plan to an extent because he was playing so well. I think that when I look back at what let Kerry down in the forward line, as you've pointed out and you've already discussed, Tyrone, their group tackling was very, very good, very disciplined, close to freeze but not quite freeze, 2 or 3 bodies in around the ball carrier, impacting the ball carrier to ensure that he couldn't get a free shot away. For me, what Kerry should have done was try and spread the ball out a bit more, move it a bit quicker so that you're not caught in possession. Tyrone were very, very good when any Kerry player took it into the tackle. 2 or 3 of them were around him very quickly. And I just thought in those situations they were too focused maybe on getting it to O'Shea and Clifford. But when you look at the team sheet for Kerry, I can understand. Because if you look at many of the other players, when you've a disciplined defence like Tyrone and they're back in a shell, in a comfortable defensive situation, well then, how are you going to score, really? You're reliant on winning a free, and that's a risk in itself because Tyrone were very disciplined in their tackling. And then it's an outside shot. And if you look at the Kerry team, their half forwards there, Moynihan, Stephen O'Brien, even Paddy Clifford, not comfortable shooters from long distance. It's not what they do well. And then a player that they probably would be comfortable in that situation, David Moran, was playing a really, really defensive midfield role, so he wasn't getting into a shooting opportunity. And I think that would have been something if they could have added that in the first half. Well, then they might have got, and you're not talking about much here, 2 more scores, maybe from a couple of outside shots. Again, no real, Jack Barry's not a threat from a long-range point either. So Tyrone knew this and knew that all they really had to do was defend the D against Clifford and against O'Shea, and it was going to be very, very difficult for Kerry to kick long-range points because they just don't have that sort of players, them sort of players there.
And what about in defence then, Billy Joe? Colin mentioned Tyrone's running game, and there was always going to be a big emphasis from a Tyrone perspective on their running game. They had men deep, they were going to break, and then at other times there were late runners like Hampsey, who Colin mentioned. Kerry in defence trying to stop Tyrone. What did you make of that?
I would agree completely with Colin there. I think the generally, particularly in the early stages of the first half, their full back line were doing a really good job. The ball was played into McCurry. He was struggling to win it because he was under such pressure, and then David Moore or a few other players were back in and around him and they created turnovers and moved out. So they defended the diagonal ball really well, and Tyrone are particularly good at getting a good ball into Maddie Donnelly or McShane, whoever's in there, even McCurry, into a bit of space. So they obviously had prepared for that and they defended it well. What let them down? And it was chronic, and I don't blame many of the defenders at all. This is a 15-man defensive effort, as everyone knows when you get up to this level. Their forwards let them down. It was their forwards that didn't track the runners, like we mentioned the people that scored. But you look at what Myler did to Paddy Clifford, put him on the back foot all the time, drove him into his own half. Clifford was nowhere near as aggressive as he needed to be defensively, and that's the same for all the Kerry forwards. Not near aggressive enough in terms of you're tracking those runners from deep, following them, being able to physically impose yourself on them. So if I was a Kerry defender going home on the train yesterday, I would have been very disappointed with the help I got out the field from my forwards and midfielders in terms of tracking those Tyrone runners. And I think that was their biggest problem defensively.
Begs a fairly simple question. This was throughout the game, so we're talking 9 minutes at a time, so we're talking 80 minutes plus another 20 of injury time, and this was a feature throughout the game. How does nobody in the Kerry team or Kerry management point to Hampsey scoring, point to McNamee scoring, and then get on to the forwards and say, you track these lads back? Maybe they could. Like, were Kerry physically, maybe Colm, not up to it, the 5-week layoff, or not battle hardened? Because, track your runners, lads, doesn't sound like rocket science.
Yeah, look, I can't see it being a conditioning issue at this stage of the year. The guys are fairly well conditioned. I know talked about the likes of Mayo and stuff, putting them in the back foot on that, and maybe having to do an awful lot of work. But I generally just think that the problem with the Kerry lads was some of the lads were man to man, and right, that's my man, and I'd keep him out of the game. And some of the guys were shuffling back. I seen in particular I think it was for McKenna's first goal, where the guys, David Moore and somebody else, was coming jogging back very, very slowly, and they didn't spot any danger. They didn't spot that this could actually end up in a goal, and if they did, they just didn't, they didn't actually, go and do anything about it. So I think it's more a case that possibly tactically that they haven't trained this way to actually show, look, like I remember watching Dublin last number of years, and one thing in particular stood out to me was whenever teams had a run on them and they were going to burn down in goal, they ran back to the 6-yard box or the 14-yard line to stop a goal. They seen danger and they knew how to stop it. It was nearly a case of watching going, are you guys just going to let that man run? And in my eyes, maybe they didn't see the danger. Maybe they thought, he can't shoot, he can't score. We'll just we'll stay close to McCurry and Molly Donnelly. But if that had happened in the opposite end of the pitch, I'd have been fairly annoyed. And from a Tyrone perspective, you go to the man who's most dangerous at all times.
Like, the first goal was so soft in that respect. Was it here he carried the ball past 2, 3, 4 tacklers, Billy Joe, and then it's not like Tyrone were going at mad pace here. They just kind of sauntered up, popped a few passes, and it was an easy finish in the end. And as Colm says, it's almost like the Kerry players, one, they either aren't recognising danger, or two, they just didn't have this rabid Tyrone-esque, must put out even the slightest hint of a fire attitude about them.
Yeah, I think they prepared probably maybe too much on the diagonal ball and working that out, and totally neglected the tracking their runners. But one other thing that kind of was, and I think is related, but was between the two, the difference between the two sides is that, Tyrone are comfortable in the chaos of it being a 15-man attack and defend game. As McKernan was comfortable up the field. At one stage in the second half, McKernan was on Killian Spillane, and McKernan was at left half forward, and Killian Spillane was looking around thinking, well, I don't really want to be here. And whereas Kerry are much more comfortable in a structured game. Clifford plays up front, David Moore plays midfield, and everything is structured and plays off that. Yeah. And I just think when you get into that sort of dogfight with Tyrone, you have to just basically, when you don't have the ball, if you're a defender, you have to go all the way, as Colm says there, all the way to your own 6-yard line if you have to, and defend. And Kerry are not used of that sort of game, whereas the Tyrone players are all really, really versatile, can all interchange positions and are comfortable in doing that. And Kerry just seemed to be, if there was a tactical difference in relation to that to me seemed to be the tactical difference in sort of that defensive organisation.
Where do you think it leaves Peter Keane, Billy Joe?
I look here, I think it'd be very difficult. When you look at the 3 seasons, and I think everyone should caveat any new manager and what they're having to deal with in COVID, because you've such limited time to work on things you might want to implement, limited games to implement them. They get beat by Cork last year, so that's your season over really early. But a lot more people that would know more about it than me down in Kerry would probably feel that his 3 years are up and that'll be it. And that may very well be the case. But I think when you look at the Kerry's record in Croke Park over the last 10 years, and I can't remember it exactly, but the stats been floating around the last couple of days, and very few wins. And then when you look at the way they were exposed in this game, and the way modern football is, the way Dublin have played it, the way Tyrone played it yesterday, the way Mayo will try and play it in an All-Ireland final, where everyone will attack and defend. If that means that your corner forward has to be comfortable in the right half forward position playing a pass, or if it means that your right corner forward has to be comfortable coming all the way back, well, then your team better be prepared to do that, and Kerry weren't.
Yeah. So, Colm, Ronaldo's at United. Tyrone are bashing up Kerry in Croke Park. Are the lads going to go out in beards for the final?
I don't think they'll go for the beards. I was laughing with this earlier. I think that they'll maybe go for a skin fade, given today's sort of society and the way things are moving with haircuts and that. But no, I don't know. I haven't heard any sort of new ideas for this time. But look, it's nice for them to be back in it, obviously.
Who do you make genuinely here? Who do you make favourites for the final, Colm?
It is very close. I did genuinely believed that Tyrone would come out on the right side of the Kerry game, and I felt that whoever sort of came through that semi-final battle would probably come through and win the final. If I'm being completely honest, so I'm going to stand by that and think that and say that I think Tyrone might be slightly ahead of where Mayo are at. And I know we're talking an awful lot about Kerry being bad there, by the way, but I do feel that such small margins and small things in games, that you're talking about Peter Keane leaving and all this stuff at the moment, but it wouldn't have took an awful lot for Kerry to turn the tide and Tyrone at the weekend as well. So to bear that in mind.
I think that's a very fair point, in fairness to Keane. Like, I was kind of surprised, even watching on the TV, Billy Joe, like the panel at half time and full time before extra time all kept talking as if Tyrone were so clearly the better team. Like, I think for a good chunk of it, the goals came at really good times for Tyrone, and then Kerry would be on top again and claw their way back, and then another goal would happen and Kerry again would get on top and claw their way back, and ultimately they got more scores on the board than Tyrone, 22 points to 17 Tyrone scores, and like one or two, like the Jack Barry volley for the goal, and then look, Canavan, in fairness, he's in on goal, he shoots, but of course it falls to McShane. Like there were certain aspects of the game did fall in Tyrone's way, Billy Joe, and that we're talking about it as if Kerry were an abomination, and I felt they were the better team for a lot of the game as well.
I'm not so sure. I don't think they were the better team. I think they were. You're right about the Jack Barry incident. Like, that ball could have easily gone off his foot and gone further out towards the Cusick stand, and there's no goal there. So that's just the break of a ball and the way it runs for you sometimes, or it does not. I think what Kerry will look back at, and I think what Keane will have to deal with, and maybe will be dealt with harshly in relation to it, is the fact that Tyrone were played with for 20 minutes in the second half with 14 men, and Kerry on top, putting pressure on Niall Morgan and his kickouts, and they couldn't turn that into scores. Yeah. Then you add that to the fact that I think two of their players at one stage had 15 out of their 17 scores. That's not how Kerry see themselves as playing football. Kerry never see themselves as being reliant on just two individuals. They feel that the footballers all over the field at all times, no matter what team they put out. And I think that, as much as anything, will put them under pressure in terms of not winning the game. But you're right, it was fine margins and it was close, and there wasn't a whole lot in it. But I think more so, what he'll have to deal with or answer questions about will be how you cannot turn that additional number on the field into more scores. Yeah, true. So how do you see the final then? Like, it's going to be ferocious, Billy Joe. Like Mayo, Horan and Kieran McDonald sitting there in Croke Park, and on the way home, like, they know this is a dogfight, and like Pádraig O'Hara and the rest of them are going to be up for it. This is going to be ferocious. Yes, it will. Mayo, no doubt, will are in a really good place in terms of their physical preparation. You saw that against Dublin, how strong they were at the end, just like Tyrone were strong yesterday. I think that when you look at it, there's a contrast, and it may be, I think Mayo are favourites with the bookies, or the last time I checked this morning, but I find that hard sometimes to understand when you consider that Mayo are dealing with injuries, and two of their best players, are unlikely to play. Well, Cillian O'Connor's definitely not going to play, and Oisín Mullen, I think it'd be a miracle if he plays. Whereas if you look at Tyrone, are getting players back from injury, and McKenna and McShane looked great for the latter stages of the game yesterday. So that's in Tyrone's favour. But I suppose the way Mayo will look at it, and I think is they'll be happy to say, if this is a dogfight, if this game is at 100 miles an hour and there's loads of mistakes, loads of turnovers in possession, well, that's the sort of game Mayo want to play anyway. So I think they'll be happy to go into a battle like that and see where it takes them. Yeah, you said chaos. Like, they're both comfortable in chaos. It'd be interesting, Billy Joe, this will be about the first final Mayo will be favourites for. Like, from memory, they weren't favourites in 12 with Donegal. So this is potentially the first All-Ireland final since, well, I can't remember, were they favourites against Meath in 96? In a long time that they might be favourites for with the bookies. No, I don't believe they were favourites in any of those finals, 96 and 97. So I think this is a big, if they retain that tag all the way up to the build-up the game as favourites, I think it will be the first time as they go in as favourites. And again, I don't think that'll be too much of a bother to James Horan or his squad. I think they're very focused on just taking it a game at a time. I think that's all they've proven that in that, because they've had to deal with these injuries. The deal with Cillian O'Connor going out, dealing with Oisin Mullen not being able to play the last day. If you were a team, they didn't let that, I suppose, affect them mentally. They just went out there and played the best they could, and it's been good enough to get them to an All-Ireland final, and they're going to take the same approach again. And I think a lot of what will happen in the All-Ireland final maybe is, I think it will be that chaos, that game. Mayo will want to see it as a chaotic game like that, and who reacts better on turnovers and possessions, who can turn those turnovers into more scores, who can counterattack more effectively following maybe a turnover and get the goals that will be key. Mayo will probably need goals. Tyrone have shown they can score those goals. Mayo will probably do a better job maybe of putting Niall Morgan under pressure on the kickouts than Kerry did. The Mayo forwards are much better tacklers than the Kerry forwards. So there's things like that may go in Mayo's favour. But at the same time, when you then look at what Tyrone were able to bring off the bench yesterday, and Tiernan McCann had an impact, obviously young Canavan had an impact, and McShane as well. Like he was huge. So that's probably in Tyrone's favour.
Yeah. As a player, more recently than Billy Joe, then Colm, Kerry being untested obviously was a big talking point in advance of the game, and most certainly afterwards. I mean, maybe you would have preferred to come through Munster some years, but do you feel it's an advantage ultimately when you do get to the latter stages to have come through Ulster? Like, do you think Kerry would have a better chance to win the All-Ireland if they were in Ulster?
I probably do, and the reason being probably that, like, I'm just looking this year at the moment, and you're thinking Tyrone have came through, a tough Donegal game, a tough Monaghan game, and that's what normally happens whenever you have close games against really good, strong opposition, is that you're able to reflect to them fairly well. And what I say, Tyrone had some narrow wins, so you're looking. Even when you win, you're looking at the things that you've done well and the things that you could do better, and having them tight games to look to and analyse. I think it gives you a better setup now. Kerry haven't come through Munster in a fairly easy fashion. What could they have seen? In them games, what could they have analysed? What in terms of what they could have done better or whatnot? And again, looking at their defensive, some of the tactical side of it in their defence, and seeing the danger and people's roles and how to analyse that. And I think that side of it's one thing that if you come through a tough few games and a province can really stand you. Also, that sort of mental, but you nearly become that sort of, if you come through a few tough games in a province, you have that mental edge of I'm battle hardened and you can see with Tyrone's intensity that they have had a few really, really tough games, and they didn't at any stage whenever Kerry were coming back at them, you could just see I always felt there was an odd gear in them at the weekend, and
right.
I genuinely do think that if you cruise through a province, it doesn't by and large it doesn't stand you as well as coming through an Ulster now. But I'm looking at Dublin and you're thinking, geez, well, they've come through the last number of years and won the All-Ireland, but I think they're an exception to the rule in this instance. Like if you've had a few tough games under your belt, it normally works, because Kerry would have been going back to nearly looking at the league and what happened in the league, and sure, they played Tyrone in the league and wiped them, so that was there was nothing to look at there either. So and going back that far sometimes isn't really reflective of where the championship is at. So yeah, I do feel that having that sort of them few tough games under behind you normally will stand you, and definitely leave you in a better place to push on. And I say, because there's probably been the good, bad and the ugly in every sort of province or every sort of Ulster Championship game, and especially this year it's been an exciting one.
It sure has. Well, look, fellas, September 11th, Saturday for the final. Billy Joe Padden, Colm Cavanagh, loads to talk about in the meantime. Thanks, gents, appreciate it.
No problem, Joe.
Cheers, boys.
Off the ball on News Talk.
Oh, Brady family ham, well, it's his, your only ham. Cured for 3 full days and there's no added water. Always carved from one pork joint, other hams, well, what's the point? It's the nation's ham from Mizzin up to Malinhead. Come out to other hams, come and face me ham to ham. Show them how you're made with mold and added water. And tell them how Brady family ham chased you away from the green and lonely fields of Kildare.
Brady family ham, it's your only ham.
Introducing your kid's favorite new sidekick, Vodafone Neo, the smart kids watch featuring Disney, including a camera, activity tracker, personalized Disney characters, and more. Stay connected with calls and texts and check Neo's location on a map, giving them their independence while offering you some peace of mind. From Neo to their first phone on Vodafone Red Family, now you can enjoy mobile plans and technology that grow with your family, so you can always be connected. Vodafone, together we can. Subject to availability, €199.99 until December